The screen lit up and I saw my own face. Not a good photo. It was from 4 years ago, the one my sister-in-law took at my brother's wedding without asking. The one where I was mid-law, mouth open, eyes half closed, holding a glass of champagne I hadn't even sipped yet. I remember thinking when she showed it to me that night, please don't post that. She posted it anyway. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach drop. It was the caption underneath, projected on the wall in my mother's living room in front of 37 people, in white Arial font on a black background. Still the family's biggest, what could have been. Happy 30th, sis. Everyone laughed. My aunt nearly choked on her cocktail weenie. My cousin actually slapped his knee. I didn't move. I was sitting in the chair nearest the window, the one my mother always puts me in because she knows I like the breeze, and I sat there with a paper plate of pasta salad in my lap and I did not move a single muscle in my face. I just looked at the screen. I looked at my own face on that screen. And then I set my plate down on the side table, very carefully so nothing spilled, picked up my purse and walked to the front door. My brother called my name. I kept walking. My mother said, "Oh, come on, it was just a joke." I closed the door behind me. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even sure what I was feeling yet. It was like when you burn your hand and there's that strange second before the pain registers, when you're just staring at the burn mark going, oh, that second. I was in that second for 11 minutes. Then I drove home. I should back up. I turned 30 that day, March 14th. My mother had been planning the party for 6 weeks. She told me this approximately 40 times between January and March, in the way she has of reminding you of her effort before you've had any chance to be ungrateful for it. She wanted to do something big. A milestone, she kept saying. 30 is a milestone, sweetheart. I live about 40 minutes from my parents' house, in a one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city that my mother refers to as transitional, which is her way of saying she doesn't understand why I chose it. I like it. I have a coffee shop downstairs and a dry cleaner next door and a little park 2 blocks over where I walk in the mornings. I have a life there, a quiet one, but mine. I work in UX design for a mid-sized tech company. I've been there 3 years. I'm good at my job. I know I'm good at it because my manager tells me regularly and because I can see the numbers. But it doesn't make for dramatic dinner conversation, and my family has always related to success through drama. My brother got a law degree. My sister-in-law is a surgeon. My cousin, who was there at the party laughing at the screen, just made partner at his firm in Dallas. These are the kinds of things my family talks about. I design interfaces. I think about how people move through digital spaces. Nobody at my mother's parties has ever known how to respond to that, so they usually don't. I had a long-term relationship end when I was 27. We were together for 4 years, we lived together for 2, and when it ended I was the one who moved out, because the lease was in his name. That's the thing my family latched onto. Not the relationship itself, not the 4 years, not the fact that I rebuilt my entire life from a suitcase in 3 weeks. What they latched onto was the optics of it. That I was 27 and starting over, that I didn't have a ring, that I didn't have a baby, that I moved into a transitional neighborhood and got a 1-bedroom and didn't immediately begin working to fix the narrative. My sister-in-law, whose name is Petra, I've always thought the name suited her, something about the hardness of it, decided around that time that I was a project. Not maliciously, or at least I don't think so. I think she genuinely believed she was helping. She would send me articles, dating apps to try, podcasts about finding your purpose after your 20s. Once, at Christmas, she handed me a book called The Intentional Woman with a post-it note on the cover that said, "This one really helped me." I thanked her. I put it in my car and donated it to the little free library near my apartment without opening it. The slideshow at my birthday party was her idea. I found that out later. The way my mother explained it, when I finally answered her calls 3 days after the party, was that Petra had offered to put together a little tribute for my birthday. A look back at my 30s. A slideshow. My mother thought it was lovely, my mother said. She really did. Mom, I said. It was supposed to be funny. You've always been too sensitive about. Mom, I said again. Stop. She stopped. That surprised us both a little. I told her I wasn't calling to argue. I was calling because there was something else I needed to talk to her about, and I needed her to hear me clearly, and I needed her not to make it about Petra or about my sensitivity or about the party. I needed to talk about Grandma Cecile's house. There was a pause on the line. What about it? She said. Her voice had changed. I think you know, I said. My grandmother died 14 months before that birthday party. She was 81, she went quietly in her sleep and she left behind a 3-bedroom house in a suburb 40 minutes north of the city that she had owned outright since 1987. No mortgage, no liens. The house was worth, according to the estate attorney, somewhere between $340,000 and $380,000 depending on the market. She also left behind a will. In that will, she split her estate between her 2 children, my mother and my uncle Garrett. My mother got the liquid assets, savings, CDs, a small investment account. My uncle got the house, with the specific instruction that if he chose to sell it, half the proceeds were to go into a trust for me, her only granddaughter, to be used for housing or education. I knew about this. My grandmother told me herself, 2 years before she died, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee she refused to stop drinking, no matter how many times my mother brought her the good stuff. She was matter-of-fact about it. She said, "I'm leaving you something real, not just sentimental, something you can use." She squeezed my hand. She said, "Your mother means well, but she doesn't always see you clearly. I do." I thought about that conversation a lot in the 14 months after she died. I thought about it while the estate was supposedly being settled. I thought about it when my uncle sold the house, quickly, 8 months after the funeral, to a developer, and when I asked my mother about the trust, she said it was being handled, and that these things take time, and that I should let the attorney do his job. I let it go. I had work, I had my apartment. I was rebuilding, and it felt fragile, and I didn't want to pull on threads. But 2 weeks before my birthday, I'd gotten a letter. It came to my apartment addressed to me from an attorney I didn't recognize. Not the estate attorney, a different one, someone my uncle had apparently retained separately. The letter was 1 page, dense legal language, but I read it 3 times until I understood the shape of it. The trust had been dissolved 14 months ago, the same week my grandmother was buried. According to the letter, my mother and my uncle had both signed paperwork authorizing the dissolution. The proceeds from the house had been split between them in full immediately upon sale. My name was not mentioned anywhere in the final distribution. The letter wasn't notifying me that something had gone wrong. It was notifying me as a formally named beneficiary that the matter was considered closed. I sat on my kitchen floor and read it 4 times. I didn't call my mother that day. I didn't call my uncle. I went to work, I came home, I made dinner, I watched something I can't remember, and I went to bed. I needed to think before I spoke. I needed to understand what I was actually looking at. The next morning I called an attorney. Her name is Barbara, and a friend from college had used her for a landlord dispute 2 years ago and said she was the most no-nonsense person she'd ever met in a professional context, which is exactly what I needed. I emailed her the letter that morning. She called me back in 2 hours. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her everything. She asked me if I had any documentation, the original will, anything my grandmother had put in writing, any communication from the estate attorney. I had the will. My grandmother had given me a copy of it herself, the same day at the kitchen table with the instant coffee. I had it in a folder in my filing cabinet with my birth certificate and my apartment lease and my car title, the folder I never look in except during tax season. I had kept it because she handed it to me and something in her voice told me to keep it. "Good," Barbara said. "That's very good." She explained what I was looking at. The trust had been dissolved before the estate was fully settled, which was, depending on exactly how it was done and what the paperwork actually said, potentially actionable. The key question was whether my mother and uncle had the legal authority to dissolve the trust unilaterally, or whether doing so constituted a breach of the estate's terms. "I want to be straightforward with you," she said. "These cases can be complicated. But from what you've described, you have standing, and you have documentation, and you have a paper trail they may not have expected you to have." I had the party that weekend. I went because I didn't want my mother to know yet that I knew. I sat in the chair by the window, I smiled at people, I accepted birthday hugs, I watched my own face appear on a screen with a caption designed to diminish me on the 1 day a year I was supposed to be celebrated. And then I picked up my purse and I walked out, and the next morning I emailed Barbara and told her to move forward. She filed in the 3rd week of April. I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother, he would have felt obligated to say something to my mother, and I wasn't ready for that. Not my friends, except for one, my closest one, who I'll call my person because that's what she is. She's the one I called from my car after the party, sitting in my driveway at midnight, still in my birthday dress. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What do you need?" Not I can't believe them or what are you going to do, just what do you need? I told her I needed someone to know. She said, I know, I'm here. The legal process was slow and not dramatic in the way television makes these things look. There were filings and responses and discovery requests and a lot of emails from Barbara that I read carefully and then filed in a new folder I labeled simply House. There was a deposition which I had to give by video call on a Tuesday afternoon in my living room, answering questions for 2.5 hours about my grandmother. About the conversation at the kitchen table, about the will and what I understood it to mean. My mother's attorney tried to make the case that I had misunderstood my grandmother's intentions, that the trust had been created informally and dissolved in accordance with the family's shared understanding of what Grandma Cecile actually wanted. Barbara let them make that argument. Then she submitted the copy of the will. The will was clear. My grandmother's handwriting was on a notarized addendum, a separate page she had added herself, apparently after the initial document was drafted, specifying that the trust for me was not to be dissolved without my written consent, and that I was to be notified of any changes to its structure before they were made. I had not been notified. I had not consented. I had been 14 months away from 30 when my grandmother died, working at my job and living in my apartment and being managed at family dinners, and nobody had said a word. The ruling came down in early September. I was at work when Barbara called. I stepped into the hallway outside my office and stood next to a plant that someone had brought in from home, and that was slowly dying from lack of sunlight. And I listened to her tell me that the court had found in my favor. My uncle was required to pay back my share of the house proceeds, plus interest calculated from the date of sale. The total came to just over $178,000. I said thank you to Barbara. I went back to my desk. I stared at my screen for a few minutes without doing anything. Then I opened the project I'd been working on and went back to work. I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt, because I think people expect a moment like that to feel like winning, like a movie moment where the music swells and justice is served, and everything makes sense. It didn't feel like that. It felt quiet. It felt like something that should have never needed to happen, finally being corrected. It felt like my grandmother, who sat at a kitchen table with bad coffee and squeezed my hand and said, I see you clearly, being right. My uncle called me 3 days after the ruling. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 3 minutes long, and I will be honest, I only listened to the first 45 seconds before I deleted it. My mother didn't call right away. She texted. It said, I hope you're happy now. I looked at that text for a long time. I thought about everything I could say in response. I thought about all the years of parties and dinners and slideshows, and it was just a joke and you've always been too sensitive, and the copy of The Intentional Woman I donated without reading, and the chair by the window that she put me in, because she knew I liked the breeze, because underneath everything she did know small things about me, even while missing the larger ones completely. I texted back, I hope we can talk when you're ready. She didn't respond for 2 weeks. When she finally called, I answered. I didn't pretend everything was fine. I didn't perform forgiveness I didn't have yet, but I stayed on the phone. I said the things I actually needed to say, about the trust, about the party, about what it had felt like to sit in that chair and watch that slideshow and understand in the same breath that this was the week I'd filed a lawsuit against my own family. I said it without yelling. I said it clearly. She cried. That part was hard. It's always been hard for me when she cries, because I love her, and love is complicated, and the two things can be true at once without one canceling out the other. What I told her near the end of that call was the same thing I keep coming back to. Being someone's daughter doesn't mean being someone's footnote. It doesn't mean smiling through a slideshow that calls you a disappointment and calling it a joke. It doesn't mean letting a trust dissolve in your name without ever being asked. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because it was true, and because my grandmother took the time to write it down in a notarized addendum. And the least I could do was say it out loud. The money went into a savings account while I figured out what to do with it. I'm not going to tell you I had some grand plan, I didn't. I spent about 3 months just letting it sit there while I went to work and walked in the park and thought about what I actually wanted. Eventually I used a portion of it for a down payment. Not a house, not yet, a condo, smaller but mine in the way that matters, my name on the deed, my decision, my future I get to determine the shape of. My brother and I talked. That conversation was harder in different ways. He felt guilty for not knowing, And I had to be honest with him that part of the reason he didn't know was that I hadn't told him, because I was protecting everyone's feelings at my own expense, which is something I'm actively working on unlearning. He's not a bad person, he just wasn't paying close enough attention. I think most families have someone like that. Petra sent me a gift when I moved into the condo. A nice one, actually. A potted olive tree, which I didn't expect and which I've kept alive on my balcony through a surprising amount of effort and genuine affection. I don't know if it was an apology or just a housewarming gift or something she did without thinking too hard about it. Maybe it doesn't matter. The tree is alive. That feels like enough for now. My grandmother would have been 83 this November. I think about the kitchen table. I think about how she made bad coffee and didn't apologize for it, and looked at me with the kind of clarity that sometimes the people who love us most fail to manage. I think about how she wrote down what she meant, clearly and formally, in language that couldn't be reinterpreted by someone else's convenience. Because she knew, I think, that the people around her sometimes rewrote things. She gave me a copy because she wanted me to have something real, something solid, something I could hold in a filing cabinet in a folder between my birth certificate and my car title. She saw me clearly. I'm learning to do the same for myself.